You are listening to Ras Temari Radio, if it's necessary, where we discuss everything but politics. We're back with two of our regulars, Sam and Mahi.
Hello.
How you doing?
It's nice to have you both.
Thank you for having us.
We wanted to start off talking about gender relationships in Ethiopia and this question that came up in conversation between me and Mahi off air, which is, we noticed obviously gender relationships are changing in Ethiopia. They're different. The dynamics are different than they are in the West or in other contexts. But we both noticed, we both agreed, that generally speaking, it is not common for men and women to be friends outside of, romantic relationships or family ones or work ones or whatever. But you don't often, it is not, in our experience, right, it is not common for both men and women to be friendly. And why might that be? Like, where had we come to notice that, and why might that be? Either of you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask a question before we start. The question I want to ask is, do you guys often have women friends without being sexually attracted to them? So that's the question I want to ask you guys and see your answers.
Not often. It might happen, but not often.
Yeah, very rarely.
Why do you think that is?
For us to be friends, I've only had one friend that I was attracted to that we've never done anything. We've always, we've teetered on the borderline of stuff, but we've never ever done anything with like 7 years of friendship. So after that, I realized like that's a dangerous game being played. And how easily you can ruin a friendship that way. A very great friendship too. So that's my thing.
But that was somebody you were attracted to, though.
Yes, 100%.
So so the answer is no. You've never, or not too many friendships.
Oh, but that's a friendship. Oh yeah. So
that you weren't even attracted to.
Yeah, I wasn't attracted to. Oh yeah, I've had friends that I wasn't attracted to. Of course, women. Of course. I actually prefer that I'm not attracted to women who are my friends.
Right.
Yeah.
But why do you think in general, when we talk about not just you guys, but I mean even you guys in experiences, a few, not a lot, not common. So why do you think in general you are probably the projections of most men, and so a lot of men in general have fewer women friends that are platonically their friends that they're not attracted to? And why do you think that is in general? Why do you think that is in life in the world?
Well, I don't know. First of all, if I'm the projection of most men when it comes to this, I personally, perhaps it's that I find the romantic comedy ideal of like friends first and then later, or anything like that, or I find that platonic thing inherently attractive, such that I don't compartmentalize as well as others might. But I don't know. I mean, it's also that I think most men find most women attractive, and vice versa. Or perhaps the basis for the friendship is also the basis for our attraction. Like some of the same things that you like about a person as a friend, or some of the things that you might like about them in other ways.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Well, my perspective as a woman and as a person who's dealt with the feminist issues and a lot of the psychology behind human interaction is the idea of that the nice guy or the friends, let's be friends before anything happens, is just a facade. It's not really a true friendship. If a person just wants to be, there's this ideology of the nice guy and then the douchebag, which actually is the same lane. The nice guys are just waiting to be douchebags. No, they're nice enough. No, I'm saying platonically healthy friendships with men and women is because of mostly men do not actually see women as friends. They see them as sexual entities. The actual sexualization, the over-sexualization in our culture, in our religion, in our society has made men see women as just one kind of a being, the sexual being. So to actually be true friends, anything you can have in common with people and not be sexually attracted to them. I have a lot of common things with a lot of my guy friends. I'm just not sexually attracted to them. But the idea of sexually compartmentalizing, or saying a person is not just a sexual being, they are actually an actual human being beyond their sexuality, I think that's the big problem there. Men have perceived women just sexually for so long that their personalities are detached from them. The idea that they could be more than their sexual beings is just completely gone from their mental pictures. So women that are especially friends to them, telling them their problems, being part of their life, is completely associated to sexuality for most men.
Is that in Ethiopia in particular, you think? Or?
No, I think it's generally with a lot of men. And, some of the men nowadays in the world are trying their best to detach the image of sexuality is equal to femininity or womanhood. They're doing a better job in other countries because of education, economy, because of the detachment of religion, the detachment of culture. A lot of that things are helping in other countries. But in Ethiopia, it's completely in an infantile level, I think. What do you guys think?
She laid the Thor's hammer. So, there's been, I guess, let me first get some things out of the way. I've had moments where I was in the exploration stage of, like, the initial stage, just exploring whether or not how attracted I am to this one individual, right? I saw physically, I was like, okay, this is nice, that's check. But then personality, I saw an amazing gold standard personality, and the quality of the benefit of being her friend outweighed, for me personally, the relationship that I can, and what's, getting into, like, multiple times going out, having fun with groups of people. When you say having fun, really it's just the club scene, but still going out, having fun, and not, never, how does, I never considered, until she actually called me out on it, how did she feel that I'm friend zoning her after we initially met through, like, a dating app, right? Like, it's like, to her, she felt like, she asked several questions to me about it too. She asked several questions about it, which made me, one of them, which made me kind of uncomfortable. She just straight up asked me, like, is it because I'm Tigrayan? And I was like, what the, why? Why would it why would I invite you anywhere?
Yeah,
I
can understand her.
I get it because of whatever the situations in here, right? So, but I get it, but that hurt, for someone to ask me that. Because then I knew that I was like, probably, I felt like I was triggering something deep that's like something more personal, something more grand than any of us, right? Something more societal level. But back, circling back, there's not any available room and space in a society that does not push forward gender equality. There's not enough space in a society or culture that allows people to detach from the kind of, like, some type of upbringing where it's like, oh, the woman, mom was always in the kitchen, mom was always, and then the man was doing this, like the patriarchy. Yeah. Like, dismantling that is not just it's not even a hard task. It's an overhaul. You need, like, a serious overhaul to do something like that.
I think mostly the problem, you have to say, is mostly the men. Like, let's say 99% of the situation is because of the men. Because
80, but...
Okay. We can talk on semantics, on words, but on numbers, but it's mostly, see, the people in power are the ones that could make change. people that don't have power can scream, can talk, can, like, this is the ideology that is really problematic in this country. When we talk about women empowerment, we're collecting women and teaching them about women know they're empowered. It's just that they cannot find power because the people, the men in power, are saying no to it. They're not learning. So when you empower women, you have to collect men and teach them that they should equalize them, that they should have the idea, like the idea of, like, you see a lot of communities in this country, it's like ሴቶች ጉዳይ or female empowerment associations and all that. It's just women in there. What, like, how is that beneficial? The benefits will be there if you teach children, men, like boys, from the school level, collect them and tell them about their female counterparts, to be their friends, to think of them as humans. You go to college and teach men to know better. You go to workplaces and teach men about women empowerment. It's not going to help to teach women because they go home to their dads and see the mom and dad dynamics. They go to school and see their male counterparts acting unaccordingly. They go to work and see the same thing. So the problem here, I think, in the worst way is we're focusing on the wrong people. We're focusing on empowering the wrong people because both of them, like men and women, they have power. They give out energies. They have achievements. They have things to do. But then again, if one is taking away the power from the other, we have to teach the people that are taking the power to give back the power and make it equal, right? And so, but like when going back to the friendship situation, though, do you guys think the culture, the religion has something to do with it as well?
There's definitely systemic changes needed in terms of policy, like public policy. Mm-hmm. It needs to be also probably addressed in a national stage. Having in a country where, it was being celebrated or put on a mantle that, half of the women in the federal government, the ministries, half the ministers are women, right? Like something like that. Like that was a huge leap in terms of some countries. There's only a few countries in Africa or in the world that that could do stuff like that, has done stuff like that.
I disagree, but continue.
I mean, you look at the Scandinavian countries, and that's a little different. There's more women in power in parliament. In Iceland, especially, there's more women. In Botswana, there's more women. But again, this is a societal. This is something that needs public policy, or kind of like civil rights movement, or like similarly how India a couple years back, they had this huge, it was like 20,000 women on the streets of New Delhi, protesting because of it started because of, I think, of an assault charge that was by a person in power that didn't go noticed. But anyways, so I think that there needs to, if you're gonna, for something, a culture to shift or policy to reform, you need to have a huge push, like a movement almost. Like most societies have done something like this, and they've gotten the benefits of it. So I think that's a place to start, even though it's a huge starting point. But that's probably the best place to start to see actual change in our lifetime. But I think you went to Friends, right? You brought it back to.
Yeah, friendship. Yeah. So the idea of friendship among the men and women, it has a lot of affectance in the religion and culture as well. So my question is, how do you guys think that is affecting our friendship, and how do we dismantle the ideology of that negative affectance of culture and religion for friendship towards men and women?
Well, on a basic level, I mean, go to an Orthodox church, the men and the women are held separately, right?
Thank you.
And that, of course, that doesn't happen in isolation. just like no social or cultural practice exists in isolation from others, there is a tendency to keep the men and the women apart, or to expect the women spend time with the women spend time with other women, the men spend time with other men. It's also, we're not too far away, and there are still remnants of a culture where people got married very young and they were arranged marriages, which kind of defeats the purpose or the need for dating, and also for other kind of social interaction between people of different gender backgrounds. Or, for instance, you go to a hotel, some certain places, at least up until recently, this shocked me coming from the States, coming from college, but this was a typical, you couldn't stay in a hotel room two people of the same gender.
Same sex, yeah.
And I remember going to, it was a resort outside of town, and I was going to get a place with my cousin. And we're like, well, we're related, and they're like, we don't care. We're like, we don't trust you guys to. And the funny thing is, a lot of times,
this is quite common.
Go together to, but there. I mean, to have that established as a rule, as a law, that you can't, spend the night sharing a room with somebody of the same gender.
It's just an unspoken law.
Well, it's a policy. Let's say the hotel wouldn't allow.
Yeah.
It, is I guess what I meant by law. But yeah, so you see this is spread out through policies, through religious norms. It's one of those feedback things, those vicious cycles where the policies, the rules, the norms then affect the relationships, which in turn inform the policies. Now, at the same time, I think it's hard to say things aren't changing, but I'm not entirely sure in what direction that change is occurring. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's changing for the positive. I think now the westernized form of feminism has been a rampant conversation in the country, and people are taking extreme measures on both sides. Men are becoming acting defensive rather than being allies. They're becoming, anti-women's rights indirectly, because they think, oh, all of you hate women, all of you hate men, we're just trying to survive. That kind of the westernized, bastardized version of feminism, the feminism where the capitalists or the people, the 1% and the above, are perpetuating. That kind of feminism is rampaging to our country now, not the actual kind, not the respectful, healthy, the actual meaning of feminism. So even the word has become bastardized. A lot of women are feminists, but they don't want to call themselves feminists, even women. And a lot of men are, the idea of I am a feminist offends them in general.
Because the term is it's like when I hear somebody say I am a feminist or I'm not a feminist, my first thought is, please define what you mean by that, right? Because first wave feminism and second wave feminism are almost entirely opposite, right? From, the emphasis on women's strength, basically the removal of any barriers to a woman accomplishing anything that a man can accomplish. That's what feminism is originally. And in that sense,
it is now too. It is now too.
Yeah, many men would agree with that in principle. You would say, so should a woman be able to do what a man can do? Many, not all, but many men would be like, yeah, sure, for the most part, Then it sort of is taken in a different direction, where it's more about. Some people have argued, I told you about Christine Hoff Sermon's work on this, that it's more about fragility, and that it's more about elite women, sort of seeing everything through the prism of hating men, or men as the enemy, and so on. And it becomes kind of a caricature of itself. And I recently wrote about this, but there's a lot of similarities to the discussions about race within the black community, and John McWhorter's book that's made all the rounds, called Woke Racism, makes the exact same argument against black people sort of playing a card, or about black people sort of demonizing white people as a whole, or seeing everything through the prism of race, as opposed to being weaponizing victimhood or fragility, as opposed to asserting themselves, and so on. So, but the other aspect of it is when you talk about capitalism making use of feminism. Many people have pointed out that in the 1970s, when women started coming into the workplace, as a result supposedly of the women's liberation movement, you now had 2 income-earning households, and that this is why right around the 1970s it's been since the 1970s that in the United States in particular, but really throughout the industrialized West, wages have been stagnant. And if you want to bring in inflation, right? If you bring in inflation, real wages have actually been falling consistently for 40 plus years since women came into the workplace, because of course you have an increase in the supply of labor. And with the increases of supply, you have a reduction in the price of labor, which is what a wage is. And so the idea that feminism was intentionally accepted into the mainstream and accepted by the capitalist power structure, right, in order for them to be able to afford to pay less for the same labor by increasing the supply of labor. So these are the kinds of things that make people misunderstand or demonize or think that's what feminism is. It's a Western construct, it's a capitalist construct, it's a man-hating construct, and I think that's why the term has become misunderstood or misused, misapplied.
Yeah. 2 years ago, on this month, probably around the same time as today, I was co-moderating a panel discussion at the Best Western Plus for an organization. It's called Me Too Ethiopia, right? And there was some backlash, there was some ignorance attached, like the way the mentality. I think what the perception that they have here when they hear Me Too is they feel it's like an attack on their I guess dominance or their ego. It's an attack. It's some people see it as a way to.
That is what feminism is.
That's what feminism is?
It is. If it's an attack on injustice. So dominance is injustice. So you know what I mean?
Precisely. And I think they saw it as like a ruse for men to be brought down by the court of public opinion. And here, because there was like instances where it's like they saw it, they really, but the worst part about it was they couldn't conceptualize how, like, what's actually like they see behaviors, they're used to doing some behaviors. People are used to doing, especially some men, a lot of men are used to doing some behaviors that they don't realize this is inappropriate, or this is violating, this is illegal, this is criminal. Like, to them, it's kind of like who's gonna stop me, or who are like where's the call the cops, or I am the cops. So it's like it's a trip, an ego trip, power trip. Not sure exactly, maybe a little bit of both, but for the average person, because there's like I've had too many discussions and I listened to too many stories in that Me Too event that made me just wake up and say, wow, I thought women had it bad, and they do have it bad in the States, but here I realized this is like another level. This is another level that I wasn't anticipating. No, I have some idea, and that's what kind of made me realize, like, okay, there's real problems, like there's real like problems that need to be solved, and it won't take several politicians to be in power. It won't take several like conferences and discussions. You need to have laws. Yeah.
I mean, but the laws, see, the lawmakers are 90% men, 95% men. If the perspective is not there, if you don't understand that, like, the problem is the movement has no men in it. That is the big problem that is happening, especially in this country. The movement needs the men to be involved at the same amount as women, because they are the problem. If we talk about us being empowered and energetic and having equal rights together, we're not part of the problem. We know that. Like women, we know we should be treated equally. We know we should have the same rights. We know we should have the same opportunities. That's not the problem. The lawmakers, which are 90%, 95% men, are making laws for men advantages because they don't have that perspective view. And then it trickles down to the daily man, where the men are not involved. This is what, like, my brother says this all the time, like, that's your problem. And I'm not gonna buy any problem. I have so many things to deal with. But that is what every kind of injustice is. See, if we all involve ourselves on our own injustice, nothing gets changed. Because I could talk about being black, I can talk about being a woman, I could talk about being a physician in an Ethiopian workforce. I can talk about my problem. I could talk about family issues. I could talk about relationship issues. Those are my problems. And you could list yours, and somebody could list theirs, and Zode can list. If we all list our problems and just focus on that, nothing actually gets changed, because we're just self-involved on our issues. But anyway, getting back to the topic of friendship, I have one thing. No, please continue.
I just wanted to ask you a question now.
Sure.
Do women contribute to the patriarchy?
Of course.
How?
Mostly ignorance. It's mostly ignorance, because most women are not educated. In the world, if we count down the uneducation level, the statistic says 70% are the female force who are complete without education. So that's how you control people, by not educating them, by making them feel. And then religion takes over, and then culture takes over. And then all the other men tell them they're the worst, they're not valuable. So because of complete and utter ignorance, because of the violations of their rights, they are contributing to the patriarchy.
And is it beholden, so it's beholden to women to make, like, for instance, if, like, should they be voting, I think women shouldn't only be voting, like, their their representatives in government should not be voting only, like, for men. I'm not saying vote for anybody who's, you like to vote for someone who's unqualified, who happens to be a woman, but she's a woman, so vote her in anyways. I'm saying, why isn't there more of a push for women in leadership?
Because they're not educated. But as I said, the problem relies on, because first of all, a lot of percentiles of leadership is mainly focused on religion and cultural basis. It is particularly patriarchal. So for women to actually pivot into the role of leadership, they have to be against the rule. They have to be against the actual form of how to be successful. And most women are uneducated already. How could they be in power if they are not educated? The system is against them. The men are against them. Even some women who are their parents and grandparents are against them. So how can they be part of the leadership role if they're not even educated enough to go there? And so when it comes to becoming equally politically involved, it's not the policy. That's the disagreement that I told you. So it was a big point that a lot of women were empowered. No, that doesn't. See, the policy is about the people. It's not about the 4 or 5 or the 20 women in politics. Those are parts of so many exceptions. They could be like 10 among billions of women, while the men are becoming still the 80% of the popular vote. So it's not like the policy is not about, or those little numbers in what we see in our government, that means nothing. Because those are the very rare women who were against every kind of problems to get there. What we need to do is do on the non-trickling level, the base root level of education. That's where we need to work on. And in order to do that, the men have to do it. Because that's how things work. Because the people in power are the ones who should be educated enough to be the better versions of themselves. And that works when women like me, who have had better opportunities and better education, have conversations with those people. The people in power, the people in big political movements, the people who have legislations on hand. But that's not happening because everybody, as I said, is self-involved. The even people who are like me and like us, who are just the general population, we are so self-involved in our own problems that we forget to include other people's pain and empathy. Like, I swear, like, nowadays, the ideology of empathy has completely gone out, and we're so self-involved. That is what's happening. Like, that's the extreme form that's happening in the U.S. Like, everybody's become so self-involved that nothing gets solved. And I think that is kind of propagating and coming towards who we are as people in Ethiopia as well. Because of the capitalization mentality, the global mentality, we are either in two extreme forms. We're either educated but ignorant against other people's problems. Now we've become selfish, non-empathetic. Or we are uneducated, poor, sad human beings who cannot be helped because the other extremes are educating themselves but being selfish against themselves.
So it's men that need to drive
It
change.
It is the biggest problem that
you know, change is driven by instigation of some sort, right? Like for instance, when a movement or some type of thing starts as a reaction, usually things are reactionary. Especially in Africa, things are usually reactionary. Rarely you would find things as preemptive, just preemptive really. So something needs to instigate this change. You know, what's going to be the ball? Like, how is the ball going to be thrown down the snow mountain that's going to go into and become like an avalanche? Like, how do you create an avalanche using a snowball? In this case of what we're talking about, especially gender equality and male cognizance on women's suffrage or women's plight.
I think so. I'm going back to the topic. So I think friendship between men and women are the big, like, I don't know, ball that you will throw. It's when men like you, who are this generation, men like Sode, who are in their prime, in their like 30s, 20s men, finding a way to become platonic friends with women, just women, without the ideology of attraction. And that dialogue creates empathy, because then you can understand that person, not to just be nice or not to get to their pants. You could just have a conversation with them regardless of what you want from them, but just by like being their actual friend and understanding their problems. And I mean, the one thing I wanted to say when we were talking about this is, when it comes to friendship, for me particularly, my biggest turnoff of a person is when they don't like me back. So if I'm attracted to a person and I ask them, or I tell them something, or I instigate some sort of flirtation, and when they are physically, verbally, or in any particular way not interested to me, that's my biggest turnoff. And then they automatically become my friend. That is what needs to work for men as well. Because when a person says no, that should be, because a relationship, a crush, a coupling of any sort is a two-way street. So when the relay system is gone, that should be, a person should be like logical enough to take away the sexual version of it, because our mind controls our body, not the other way around. We're not animals. This is why, like, a lot of men make excuses for their male counterparts who are so worse. Like, their male friends might act so sexualizing, might act so demonizing against women, and their automatic response is, I mean, it's just him, you know. But that's not what's supposed to happen. In friendship, if a person particularly is not attracted to you, and you see that in their picture, and you see that in their physical response to you, that should be a considerable turnoff. And you should either make a choice now, because then you as a human being can control yourself, but you can't control the other person. So as I say, if I'm really attracted to a guy and he's friend zoning me, I have two choices. I will either choose to be his friend without wanting anything. Even if that person comes and says, I am interested in you now, I'm just done. Like, I'm turned off now. And then the second one is, I can't be friends with that person because I'm way too attracted to them. Then I'll just go and leave. And I will just respect their space. This is what needs to happen to men as well. You need to make a choice because I can control me, you can control you. But what you do makes the other person feel bad or good. Our actions are what makes us bad. So, like, but anyway, that's what needs to happen is my opinion.
You know, you can't teach social intelligence. Like, you can teach academic intelligence, of course. You know, like emotional intelligence, that comes through time and experience, sometimes through exposure. But social intelligence, that can't be taught. You'll never be able to teach somebody that.
Society became a society because they had a societal way of acting. I think it's just the society that's condoning women and giving men space. The ideology where women mature more than men is a complete fake ideology. It's because men are infantilized, so they mature less. Women mature normally because they see things that are happening in their lives. They have ups and downs, but men are infantilized. They're taught whatever actions they have is okay because they're men. It's not women that's maturing more, it's men that are maturing less. So that's what I mean. Society can still teach them.
Yeah, it can. Yeah, you're right, it can. Although, you know, society is not the best educator, let's just say. It's not the best professor in the world. It actually lets a lot of its students fall between the cracks of its foundation. So, like I was saying, you know, social intelligence is more or less like someone has to teach themselves that. Someone has to go through those trials and tribulations to reach that point, like where they just ascend mentally, so that they can be able to have platonic friendships with women, or they can even have emotional, like they can have a level of, because there is emotional intelligence attached to social intelligence. And excuse me. And when you have like a lot, again, you know, and it comes with education, right? It comes with interacting in the classroom for, let's just say, X amount of years, no matter what, for primary, secondary, tertiary schools, whatever, universities, whatever. That's where social intelligence happens. That's where you build it. When not a lot of people have access to these institutions, they end up, or, you know, that's not even an excuse, because there's some people who have exceptional education from top tier universities, even abroad, but they have they're essentially they're not even the lower
social infants.
They're social infants simply because they were spoiled. Like, there's some rich, wealthy people with low social intelligence, low emotional intelligence, high academic intelligence, and, you know, they're cool with other men because it's not hard, but they literally will treat a woman like an object. Let's just say an object. Maybe not a family member, maybe not their sister or nothing like that, but there's a lack of consideration towards someone's humanity when you believe that your access to capital or your access to opportunities gives you carte blanche, or gives you the freedom or carte blanche, as I say, to behave in a certain manner, to walk around like your
because
stuff
they don't have
stink.
any healthy friendships. That's, as a kid. So this is what I'm turning back to our topic, which is, as a kid, if you don't have a platonic girlfriend as much as you have a guy friend, then you don't see the perspective. You see your family, you see your mom, your sister, you see your aunts. That's about it. Your women perspective of you is completely obtuse. So completely acute that you've no idea what women as humans are. Because men are men with friends, but women are friends with everyone. So that they see the perspective, they see the ideology. But then when men are true friends, They're just friends with men.
But women often use sexuality as a to show a high level of social intelligence.
How common is it?
Very common. The more beautiful she is, the more she can finesse what do you mean no?
No, I mean no. Definitely that does exist, but then I don't think that's the big problem that is causing the dynamic shift or the problems of friendship in our society. Yes, those women exist, especially women, upper class women, or even women who are physically attractive, which is a very small percentile of people. I'm sorry.
False.
No, come on. Like, the ideology behind every woman is attractive to me is a very, very obtuse
I'm not saying that. I'm
yeah.
not definitely saying that.
Most women are not just like weaponizing their sexuality to be advantage. Trust me. Like, I would tell you as a woman, if there was a much common ideology behind women weaponizing their sexuality, no. Women actually don't want to be as sexualized as they want to be.
Weaponizing? I say the word mainly is capitalizing, not weaponizing.
Okay, sorry, but capitalizing. So the ideology of women capitalizing on their physical figures or their beauty or the beauty standards to gain some sort of economical power or
leverage
is the main problem is the patriarchy, which is already sexualizing women. So that's what's pivoting women to becoming an ignorant version of themselves. They don't see how they could be powerful, how they could be energetic and treated equally without capitalizing on that, because that's what men only think is valuable enough to respect it. So it pivots upon the patriarchy, which is the man problem again.
Yeah, but women, it's a survival tactic for women to use this capitalization of their femininity or sexuality or what I feel like it's for them it's survival. But again, the biggest problem of this, of course, is yes, there's levels in every culture, every society. Patriarchy there's a scale. It's a spectrum to it, right? Some places are worse. Some places are worse than let's just say Ethiopia, right? Mm-hmm. Like you can go to I don't want to name any countries that I might do business with. So there's some places where women don't have luxuries. They can't do things. They can't do many things. So like they make this country look like a haven for women in some places.
Well, this is a country where women have always, or for a very long time, been in a position to own property, to own land, which isn't always the case in other places. This is a country which doesn't have the same kind of patrilineal kind of tradition. I mean, you take on your father's name, but it's not quite the same as women maintain their maidens' names. It's a country that has had female rulers. So while it is a country that is defined by patriarchy, not necessarily to the same extent that other societies, but we talked about this once. I think it was the one time you came on here and we ended up not posting that episode. But you felt, and I think there's something to this, that societies where men are societies that are more sexist or misogynistic, where people are more openly patriarchal, tend to be more socioeconomically downgraded, where people are just kind of struggling for survival. I mean, if you look at the hood or even rural, poor rural white communities, the men tend to, in my experience, compared to like liberal
Black America.
Yeah, Black America and also rural white America. Exactly, absolutely.
And rural white America.
Right. That's where men tend to be much more sort of have more the bravado and the misogynistic. But you agree with that as a theory that's.
I think it has to do with class and economic standing and class.
Right.
Where because there's families. I know, for instance, like women who came who are just born into the right family, they have no barriers, they have no ceilings above them because they have access to wealth, opportunities, education. So they end up being doctors, lawyers, PhDs, whatever. They end up being top tier in society because they won the lottery. Essentially, that's what it is. But that's a lottery compared to what on average, it would take. We already know, like, a man can, he doesn't have to. He can come from like a middle class family, and get to the same place as that woman did, as that same woman that we just mentioned. He can get to the same place. It might take him a little longer, and it might be a little tougher for him to navigate, to maneuver, but he can get to the same place because it's just the barriers for him, the obstacles he has to face is not the same as hers.
I agree, but I would go further that it's not just upper class. I would say even being around a lot of middle class people, white and black, in the United States, including Ethiopian immigrants or first generation Americans of Ethiopian descent, people in New York and Jersey and California. The idea that a woman would stay home and not pursue her career and not get a good education was just, nobody would even consider that a possibility. Like, of course she's going to work hard. Of course she's going to get a good degree and get a good job. She has the same expectations placed on her as a man did. And that's my experience of middle to upper middle class America. Immigrants. Including, not exclusively. I mean, I know a lot of white people out there. Their daughters, yes, she's going to go to school and she's going to... They wouldn't necessarily impose on her, like, she has to be a doctor, she has to be a lawyer. I think even that is kind of gone. But yeah, she's going to, earn money and learn and pursue her own life and her own career. It's not even... You didn't even have to say it. It was so just like an acceptable... Is that your experience too, I think?
Yeah,
more or less. Yeah. Whereas here, that's not necessarily the case.
No.
Or upper class women.
I mean, the idea of class and economy being the major factor for a lot of misogyny in lower countries is not just the economy. It's the education, the lack of education because of the economy imposes. That's the big problem there, because economy, first and foremost, takes away formal education, social education, and access to information. And that is what takes away everything, which is people, when they are poor, when they are destitute, when they are in the lower class, they tend to find comfort in not formal education, but in cultural education and religious education. That's Correct. How people find comfort.
Informal avenues of education. Exactly. Which is one of the themes of this
informal education is,
go
primarily patriarchal. That is, informal education in its own construct, because of our ancestral beings, we were focused on survival as prehistoric human beings. And the ideology of men being on top, men being the protectors, the providers, and women being the nurturers and the maternal figures is prehistoric, right? So when we go through that, that's where culture comes from. That's where traditional religion comes from. And if you take comfort in that informal education, that's where you end up. You end up in patriarchy. You end up in misogyny. There's no other way to go, because find me one religion, one culture that is not primarily patriarchal.
Yeah, I think for the most part, although maybe to varying degrees, but this touches up on a very important issue that is central to why we created this station, right? Ras Temari, self-education and so on. The observation being, the central observation being that, first of all, there is a crisis of formal education in this country. There's a crisis of formal education. And to me, it is the most significant social crisis that Ethiopia faces. There are exceptions. There are people who get a good education in Ethiopia. But the rule is that as quantity has increased, quality has decreased significantly in the last 30, 40 years. But meanwhile, there's also been this other interesting thing, which is access to information is through the roof. This is why people are self-educating in these very specific sort of niche or specific sort of sets of interests or specific disciplines.
Excuse me? Remote learning, yeah.
Remote learning, people learning online, but also people learn through watching cable television YouTube. Right, the internet, the digital, the fact that more and more people are connected to people abroad, either because they traveled or because there's a growing diaspora that has some connection that can send you stuff back. I mean, this Addis Ababa used to be the Pyongyang of East Africa in the 80s, like when the generation just above us, like 10, 15 years older than us, when they were coming up, They will tell you, nobody talks about it anymore. It's been forgotten, strangely. But 40 years is not that long ago. 35, 40 years is not that long ago. And people here had no exposure, right? So there's been this steep increase in exposure. And it's interesting because the informal avenues of education, of cultural education, as you called it, the religion and so on, does this mean they're being replaced? Or does this mean that now we're replacing what we normally get through formal education because that's gone down, downhill with these new avenues of informal exposure and education?
I mean, my observation in this is the informal educations are not gone. I mean, people are so highly religious in this. The fact that I'm an atheist is an abomination for my parents. Like the actual word, the actual conversation in any place that I'm around makes me sound like a crazy person.
They think it's pagan, right? People still here think atheist means pagan, which is not what atheist is. Pagans are people who worship trees and the sun. That's not an atheist.
But the ideology is completely the same for them.
Right.
So, people are so highly religious.
There is no concept of atheism.
Yeah, people can have varying forms of religion. Yes, the younger ones are much less religious, but then the idea of not being not being assimilated to formal religion is an abomination in this country. So religion has not gone anywhere, especially in the rural areas as well, because the rural perspective is still, because of no formal education, the decision making completely goes to the religion and culture at the same time. It's ከባህላችን ውጪ ነው ከኗኗራችን ውጪ ነው ከሶሳይቲው አትውጪ. That's the kind of words that people use in any perspective in Ethiopia. But then when you say formal education or getting a global education from internet, this is what I mean by people should get formal education, constructed education, where people who give education, people who are thought to give education, have to compartmentalize and localize things so people would perceive them in a healthy way. Because, jargons of information on the global internet will just lead to pornographic addiction. That's basically what the concept of education practically will be if we just randomly give education to everyone.
No, you're good. No, would it be conducive for in the formal education, there would be formal education, feminism as a class in let's just say secondary school, right? Mm-hmm. Would that be conducive to societal, or would it be
in high school?
Basically,
let's say elementary.
No. That's too young. You have to be. High school would be.
No, there's so seriously, there's so many books out there for that are particularly constructed for elementary schools to talk about feminism.
Yeah, that's fine.
What about in the context of sex ed? In the context of sex ed, where you no, I know, but because a lot of people are pushing for sexual education, for health reasons, for safety reasons, for for psychological reasons, that sex ed should be offered to kids right around the time when they become sexual, right? So that they know how to protect themselves and so on.
High school.
But high school or late middle school, right? 7th, 8th, 9th grade, and possibly within those confines. Since because the one problem I see with this is I'm not against that at all, but then you open Pandora's box and people are like, well, if we're going to talk about feminism as a class, there's only a handful of opportunities for different kinds of classes outside of the maybe 2 or 3 electives that you can take. If we're going to talk about feminism, should we also have a class on critical race theory, which is a big thing in America now? Should we also have a class on
this? 50% of the population.
But no, it's actually 100% of the population that needs to learn about sex and gender. Right. Yeah. No, but 100% of the population also has to learn.
Minorities are 50%.
Correct, but the 100% of the population could also benefit from a discussion of race and tribalism in Africa in order to avoid the possibilities of genocide. 100% of the population could also benefit from more. I believe in music education. I believe in art education. I believe in. Then it becomes, well, we don't have enough time in the day, right? So what I'm saying is the possibility, since already there's a push for sexual education, I think a lot of people think it is necessary at the middle school and high school level for safety reasons, for health reasons. People just need to have an understanding of what's going on with their bodies. In conjunction with that, to talk about gender roles, to have these conversations about feminism, to have these conversations like the one we're having now, and create a space within the curriculum for that kind of understanding, or Otherwise, I'm just addressing the fact that people immediately, when you say, well, let's have feminism in middle school and high school, even if they're not against it in principle, their reaction is going to be like, well, why not have a class about this or that kind of study, or this or that, you know what I mean? Any number of other similar related
first
topics.
First and foremost, I grew up in the formal education of Ethiopia, and there are discussions about ethnicity, there are discussions about religion, there are not discussions about feminism. There's no discussion.
What's the context for those discussions? Like, what kind of class?
Because
History or social studies?
Yeah,
Okay.
Social studies and history.
When you say
So,
feminism,
let me finish. But anyway, when we talk about feminism and sex ed together, that is the problem that I'm trying to solve, because it's all about sexualization. It's all about sex. You know,
Right.
When you
Women
talk
are
about
seen
women,
through their
When you talk
sexuality.
about women and men, the first thing that should come to mind should not be sex ed.
I agree. I agree.
So when we do a version of feminism talk, or talk about gender, we should talk about humanization of women, just like treating them as just part of the community. That should be taught at the lower level, in kindergartens, in elementary schools. It should be part of the subject level to just tell them that, what do you see?
But incorporated into the existing curriculum as opposed to a class on its own.
Of course.
Right? So like a
Yeah.
history class or social studies class, or where we talk about these kind of,
But
or
I
even
think
biology.
It needs more focus.
Right.
So that's what I mean. It needs more focus. So I think there should be an subject of gender. Like there should be a subject of gender. Or
Like for a full year?
No, I mean like
gender-
part of the curriculum. Like one subject as part of the curriculum.
Right, for a full year? Or
Sure.
for
semester,
multi-year? Or?
No, just
let's-
2 semesters. But the thing is,
We could go through. We could do a trial period where we could see 1 or 2 years of each levels of education. So we could do one in elementary school for 1 year, and one for one high school year, and then one for middle school.
Or as a
and
trial
then see
thing, since you made the point, having gone through education here, which Sam and I have not, right, that, there are discussions within the context of social studies, history, those existing, probably even literature classes and so on these other issues, whether it's class or gender or race or tribalism, ethnicity, etc., that to incorporate. They did this. So I was a literature teacher in the U.S. Right, I taught English. I also taught history at the higher levels. Right, when I taught English, there's always a push, right, and usually there's a backlash to it. And I experienced that because I was a black teacher with white students. There's always a push to teach sensitivity, cultural sensitivity, basically through literature. Right, so you would teach a book about the Holocaust. There would often be classes about the Jim Crow South. It was also, we were in the Northeast, and Sam, how people in the Northeast always try to make racism like a Southern issue. Like, it was a long time ago and it was in the South, right? We don't want to confront our own. But regardless, this was brought out. Sometimes you overdo it, and you find that there's a backlash, especially if you have a black teacher. But the idea that maybe in teaching literary texts and incorporating them into English and Amharic curricula, that there could be, incorporated a few texts written by women, or either about sexuality or about feminism or that kind of thing, you know what I mean, into existing kind of disciplines.
to be honest, it cannot be a course on gender or a course on race or ethnicity. It has to just be it has to be called equality. So it covers everything under the sun.
That's actually a good idea.
Yeah, just everything under the sun. Because
There should be a subject.
it's a critical. Not even just in a national sense, in a global sense. Like, what does inequality look like, and what does equality look like?
Can it's funny that you mentioned the word equality. The word equality is a dirty word among like Western liberal circles, right? You know this, right?
No.
Oh,
Also.
okay. So you can't use words like equality in like development agency circles, like World Bank, IMF circles. You have to be careful even at the UN. You cannot use words like equality, depending on what kind of Western academia. If you use it in a history context, nobody has a problem with it. If you use it in political science, economics, public policy context, people will look at you like you are a communist, right? Equality is like, what do you mean? Everybody has to be equal? So they'll use terms like...
equality of outcome is the problem.
Equality of outcome as opposed to the equality of opportunity, exactly. So they'll use words like equity, as opposed to equality, equal opportunity. Right, equity has replaced equality because people freak out. Equality, what are you, Mao Zedong? Is the perception. So what I'm saying, the reason I mention that is not to dismiss you using that term. I think it's a good one. I personally would love that. But even the terms that you use are going to be problematic, or people are going to read into them somehow, right? So for instance, another one might be identity, right? Where we don't just talk about race, we don't just talk about gender, we don't just talk, but you have a class or maybe an elective to start with in middle schools and high schools about identity. Well, people are going to immediately read into identity, right? Because even that has become it has a lot of baggage, right?
But the whole construct is a given thing, which is not ideal for a person to develop as who they are. If you give them an identity.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. You're going to learn your identity in school? Or you're going to school to teach? Or you can hear the parents already, you're learning in school. The teachers are going to... Right. And a lot of parents, and I think they're right about this, a lot of parents are very wary of teachers. A lot of people in general are very wary of teachers, and a lot of teachers do this, who use their platform, platform as a means of like inculcating their views. Indoctrination, or at the very least inculcating, right? Subtle indoctrination is inculcating, right. Which teachers, in some sense, are supposed to do, right? They're supposed to share their passion, they're supposed to share their interests, their perspective, but you know what I mean? There's a fine line where it becomes, no, I'm here as a teacher to try and spread as an ego thing, right? To make sure that I keep my imprint on the next generation by influencing. I have teachers like that, and there's very few things that a teacher can do that are more annoying or more upsetting to, especially to parents, because the parents are like, okay, well now you're taking over my job, or you're doing so instead of teaching the curriculum. It's often older teachers that pull that because they feel more that they're in a position to do so. They're more entrenched, they're more established, so they're not as threatened. So old school conservative type teachers in private schools in the States would do that kind of thing all the time.
I used to be a teacher as well. I taught civics.
Nice.
And it was in the South Bronx. And
that sounds amazing.
Yeah, the majority of the students were Hispanic Latino, which is a language I know. But I don't know how to tell you like how tough it was maintaining.
What's the name of the school?
It was the School of Sports and Athletic Sciences or something like that. Yeah.
Sports and Athletic Sciences. Yeah, okay. Because I almost took a job doing almost the same thing at a school called Izquierdo. It's a charter school in that same region. For people who don't know, the South Bronx, this is like one of the poorest communities in the entire country. If not the poorest community, is the southern part of the Bronx. Black Latino. This is also where hip hop began. Right. Is in the South Bronx, and very, very, very rough area. But that's also as a teacher, it's empowering, right? Because that's who needs the most help, right? That's where you can be as much a resource as possible.
But civic engagement was what I was teaching them how to engage your leaders on a local level, state level, national level, and then at the end of the semester, we was gearing up for an action day project at the end of the semester where they actually have to put what I taught them into action and to mobilize them. So like I would push them towards the end of the semester to basically now we have to draft up. We have to send letters to your representative, right? Your state representative. I try to convince them to pass a law involving gun violence in schools for better protections of students. Like revising policy. Like I was getting them to understand that you can be the change you want to see. Now,
do we have civic education either?
No,
we don't have. Civic.
We do in private schools, but it's not even that scrutinized. It's not that in depth given.
And that's and it's mainly driven by the how political parties have the youth part of their parties. Yeah, those are the ones. back before this new political arrangement, the Prosperity Party, every political group had the youth component that would. It wasn't civics. It was indoctrination.
Sure. I mean, the long history of that in pretty much any political movement in Ethiopia. There's always the
including
civic education,
including Eritrea. So we have a youth as well element. So but here it's it needs to be like there needs to be more. It needs to be like a woman empowerment element to things here. I'm trying to.
Could that be in the context of civics? Because this is what I was thinking when we were talking about what would be the context or what would be the way to incorporate it into a curriculum. So we're sitting here experimenting like we're education policy people, but what about the possibility of having civic education incorporated into the public school system here, devoid of politics? Because not all civics is politics, right? I know that sounds difficult to do, but like if you put it into establishing the curriculum.
Even talking about women's rights without talking about politics is very difficult.
It's almost impossible to talk about anything in Ethiopia without talking about politics. Yeah. We're discovering that doing a station that we're setting out to talk about everything but politics. That's part of the exercise is to try, right? That doesn't mean you just give up and just say, okay, well now let's just go full 9 on politics. But if you could do a civic education program in Ethiopia, in the public schools, that was centered on these questions of class, gender, socioeconomics, anti-tribalism, without that then devoting into another form of nationalism. We talked about Shabia yesterday as an example of like the idea that greater Unitarian nationalism often masks a certain kind of favoritism of one kind or another, right? But like if you could get into those discussions of nationalism. If you could teach history, but like history not in the way that people think history is, which is like in the U.S. especially, like history is the Louisiana Purchase happened in 1806, and the Jefferson, blah, blah, blah. But like history, like having them read about liberational movements in the 60s and 70s, not just in Ethiopia, but the civil rights movement, and read about Fanon, and read about black liberation in particular. And in that context, have these discussions about feminism, about women, about gender, about sexuality,
I mean, when we talk about history, the biggest, I think, in general, not just Ethiopia, but in general, the biggest difficulty we have is the current government bastardizing the history. I think there's always some form of in history books, in history, especially like school books, there's always this ideology of they did nothing right. There's just this one side of written history, especially during the curriculum. You could go on history books that are written before the time of the current government everywhere, and you would find a completely different version than what is being taught to kids. So first of all, the ideology to teach kids about history has already been polluted. Skewed. And so, especially when we talk about women's rights and women's history, it is going to be even more skewed because of religion and culture and the politics on its own. So,
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. But as somebody who studied history at a higher level, and in particular when it came to Ethiopian history and whatnot, there's two aspects to that, and they're opposites. One is that is highly unfortunate and a real problem, right? That the history is biased, that it's skewed, and that history is sort of written by the victors, and that there's always a political indoctrination aspect. I mean, this happens in the United States too. Children are raised on what is called American history. It's indoctrination into American ideology. It's the celebration of the mythology of the forefathers, the greatness of the Constitution of Jefferson and this and that, to the point that people grow up and you talk to some of these adults and they still believe that that's like the greatest values are like the Constitution, blah, blah, blah. And you point out to them, it's like, dude, I'm a black guy. The Declaration of Independence was written like, a couple of blocks, all men are created equal, written a couple blocks away from a slave market, right? So, but you can't say that to people because it hurts their feelings because they were indoctrinated as children into that. But so part of that is deplorable, and then part of it is inevitable. That's the opposite side, the other side. Because I've sat in history classes, and generally how it works, if you're doing history at like the PhD level, you bring in a text, And you read it and you're like, oh, this is really good, blah, 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 blah. And then you have an hour-long discussion where you dissect it. And by the end, almost like 90% of the text that you read end up being complete crap in your mind. It's like that was nonsense. What is this guy talking? What was this? You sit there and dissect any piece of history. History is not, and anthropology and political science, and these are not really sciences. I hate the term political science. We have this approach that everything should be objective, otherwise it's a matter of opinion, and all opinions are equally dismissible, is the view that a lot of people here have now. Whereas in the reality, just because something is subjective or a matter of interpretation doesn't mean it's nonsensical or doesn't mean it's not worth having those conversations. You know what I mean? It's just we have to accept that this is subjective and that, you know what I mean?
And one advantage that I see in our country is, especially in comparison to a lot of the European countries and the US and all that, the indoctrination has not been so infiltrative like theirs. Theirs has been a history of 100 years of history of the same stories, but like different politicians talking about it. It's the basic story is the same. But in Ethiopia, we have a rising new democracy every 30 years or so. Like, you know, the whole the whole anarchist royal
monarchy.
Yes, so that's it, monarchy. That's basically anarchy at this in the ruling level. But anyway, so the idea of the royal family being at some point part of the governing structure, and then a few decades later, now being governed by the military, and then like semi-democracy. We have a very young and new developing ideology that like severe 4 or 5 generations of indoctrination has not happened. People have very different views because they were brought up in different generations and different political standpoints.
Right, I agree, so, and that's one of the key observations of this station as well.
Yeah, but that's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's also typical. It's also typical, right?
Yeah.
Because this is the other thing that looking to the United States creates. Because the United States convinces you that 200 years is a giant expanse of time, when 200 years is nothing. And yes, compared to most countries, including Ethiopia, but not exclusively Ethiopia, nor is it even exceptional, right? Having the same political system for 200 years is a very long time. It's only the United States that has accomplished that. Yes. However, I mean, look at France, right? They're on their 5th republic. And this latest republic, people think that the French that system has always been. That dates back to, I believe, the 1960s, 50s. First there was the crisis in Algeria, and then there was May 68. So, you know, the French system, the current French constitution, the French system, has only been around in existence for 50 years, even though the French have the longest running consistent culture of democracy, of rebellion, of equality, fraternity, liberty. So living in all this is living in shifting political terrains. It's not just that, as you say, it's a good thing or it's an acceptable thing. It's also the typical thing, right? You don't necessarily want to be in the American system when it comes to that, because in the American system, people are like, oh, we've had the greatest system ever. It's been 200 whole years, and so everybody just accepts it and is indoctrinated into it.
But then I think the self-criticism is still. I feel like we are the Africa, the Americas of Africa. Like in so many ways, especially when it comes to that patriotic, we are the best kind of bravado. We're so much like the U.S. Like I know we're scrutinized, especially during this current political problems, that we think of them as enemies in a very different structure than we are. But in so many ways, except for the big one, which is the economy, a lot of us as Ethiopians, I would say a lot of Ethiopians, not me, but we do not self-criticize. We think we're the best. We think we're at the epitome of Ethiopianness or patrioticness. And I think that's a really bad thing, because you see that bravado, that ideology, that like that sheep mentality in the U.S., making the very wrong assumption that they're the best, they're great, they're making amazing of their continent and their country, which the reality, that is not the issue at all. And I think we're doing the same thing to our country.
One way to term that, I know exactly what you mean. One way to term this is exceptionalism.
Yeah.
Right? American exceptionalism. Ethiopians do have this exceptionalist standard, but I would say it's not nearly as dangerous or as arrogant or as delusional as American exceptionalism. Because, well, it's not like Ethiopian exceptionalism leads to the conclusion Ethiopia is so exceptional that Ethiopia gets to break international law and impose its...
If they could, they would. It's because of the economy.
They have.
Well, when I say break... Hold on. When I say break international law, I mean, like, the Ethiopian government, and perhaps the Ethiopian government would if it could, but no Ethiopian government under any leader has ever decided, oh, there's a dictator halfway around the world. So, like, what are we going to do about it? By the way, every time anything comes up in the news in America, anything happening around the world, is, what do we do about it? And we is the government, and doing things is going to war, right? Or bombing that country, right? Violence is the only real action. Any other inaction besides violence? Perhaps that's the case, but I'm just saying, then the ideologies are equally dangerous, but the way they're marshaled in the American context is different. But I mean, one guy, I think it was Glenn Greenwald, wrote about this beautifully. Here's how crazy American exceptionalism is. Imagine if you were the most powerful, the richest, the best looking person. Imagine if countries were people. You were the most powerful, the best looking, the most dominating person. You got all the girls and whatever in school, and you walked around saying, you know how I'm like richer and better looking and cooler than all of you? Yeah, I'm number one, so I get to like treat anybody here like crap because I'm exceptional. Even if people accepted that, it's because they have to, and everybody would secretly hate that guy and want them to lose. So for any Americans who are listening to this, in case there are, why do they hate us? Why do they hate us? Maybe that's why. Maybe it's that whole like upfront sense of exceptionalism. I mean, that's literally an ideology the way we were talking about
Africans
Shabia.
think of us. That's what African countries think exactly like that when it comes to Ethiopia.
That we have that exceptionalist mentality?
Yeah, because we treat them as if we are, we won against colonialism, and we are among the most patriotic people that would die before anybody that is white or that is of any other color to like get away with taking our land and our country. And so we're better. You just, you caved in, and we are better. And we are Abesha, we are Ethiopian, while the rest of you are Africans. And we actually want to associate with the ideology of, the Arabs, the whites, the whiter versions of Africa. We always tell ourselves, like, we're not black.
Right.
We're
Black,
actually,
Caucasian,
yeah, we're
Afro-Asiatic,
no, that's
Semitic.
the word we use. We're Semitic.
We use all those.
Semitic is like the Cushitic, which is the real Africa, combined with the Arabic Africa. And we're kind of in the middle ground, but the better version of both, because we have more patriotism of Africanism.
Can I say real quick?
Being the African version of
Can I say real quick, because I know Sam wants to jump in. I want to say something that's really addresses. To me, the real problem with the Ethiopian mentality isn't even the exceptionalism. It's the contradiction between believing we are like the lead because of African Union, because of Rastafarianism, because of Adwa, because of the survival of Ethiopian independence. For any of those reasons, that we are somehow the leaders of Black Africa. That we're the most patriotic, most black nationalist, we're the symbol of resistance, which is great. I love all of that, except for at the same time, there is also this mentality of superiority, like, well, we're also better than other black people, and we're not really black. And to me, you have to pick one or the other. You can't have it both ways. Sam, what were you going to say? I know we mentioned a lot of things.
Whoa. I mean, I don't want to sound to make any offense, but there was a lot of truths being said here. A lot of truths was just said. So I don't think I need to really add on to anything, but make probably references to, like there was the exceptionalism when the invasion of Mogadishu was legally justified, right? There was exceptionalism when after the border war with Eritrea, that they were Ethiopia was allowed. When I say they, though, there was a specific they were allowed to occupy Eritrean land with even going against the Algiers agreement, the border agreement. They were still able to occupy land illegally for too many years. What was it, from 2000 up until 2018? They were on Eritrean soil. So, and the international community did nothing about it. There was so many complaints being raised. Everyone just said, "Well, that's our homie."
They used exceptionalism to justify those actions.
Well, exceptionalism is what I'm saying is that Ethiopian exceptionalism was the justification, but backed by the international community, obviously.
Correct.
It was, yeah, but they were given the green light to basically break international law.
Correct, but by the international community, which is what determines the international law. I'm not saying that those actions are okay. I'm not saying that. No. I'm saying that in a sense they're very different from the way in which American exceptionalism proceeds, which is to say, Ethiopia is able to do these things because it has support, even if it's in certain specific, the Ethiopian government at the time, is able to do these things because it has support within specific situations from the international community. American exceptionalism is screw the international community. Oh, the UN doesn't want to sanction the war in Iraq. Well, we'll go to the UN just to give ourselves a rubber stamp. But if they refuse to give it, we're going to go ahead with the war in Iraq anyway because we're America and we're number one. Ethiopia, perhaps not because we're ethically superior to anybody, including the Americans, but perhaps it's just because Ethiopia doesn't have that kind of power, most likely. But still, that kind of exceptionalism is only based on the support of the international community in those specific. Whereas American exceptionalism is the complete rejection of the need for support for the international community. The international community needs support from America, is the way Americans think about it. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think there's a bit of a false equivalence we might be making here.
The only difference, or the only thing that's lacking, is the economy and the gunpowder, the military power. That's the big problem. The economy and the military power was equal. Ethiopia and America would actually behave exactly the same way as countries, because that ideology of we're better bravado is so immersed in Ethiopianism. I mean, we hate each other as ethnic backgrounds. We hate each other as religious backgrounds. We hate Eritreans because they're just like, oh, they're just detached and they're not Ethiopian enough. And then we hate every African country to the worst extent. We already have that small hates in the country level. We're already divided. And then, but when we hate others, that's a different situation. Like, people are completely, I see people who are like, they live in Europe, in the US, and Ethiopians and Eritreans are like family. Because, now there's an even horrible war out there. They have to fight because they hate white people and they hate Africans and they hate everybody else.
Mahi, we talked about this extensively in our episode yesterday.
Okay.
Believe it or not, those divisions can be pretty sharp out there as well. So in some cases, yes. In some cases, no. Right? Sam was telling us that he grew up in a heavily Eritrean community and almost no meaningful interactions with Ethiopians in that heavily in what was it, the Upper Manhattan right there you go.
I could tell you my personal experience in this situation about the whole Eritrean vibe. Anyway, as a child, I had a lot of Eritrean friends because that was the around the time where the referendum happened and people had to choose their direction, whether they're purely Eritrean or they just assimilate with the Ethiopian community. And so when I was in high school or early in middle school or something, that a lot of the Eritrean community that chose to stay here had to be in our community because I lived in that part of the community. And I was particularly told by family members, by friends that are not Eritrean, that like they're dangerous, they're bad people, they're horrible people, do not be around them. And I've had really like lifelong friends, and it's just that ideology that perceived ideology of they're not part of us, they're not our group is always embedded in Ethiopianism. And I think that's the same in the American mentality as well. Because, like that ideology of Americanism is always the better version of humanity. Like, that's how our commonality works. We could be very different, but then our Americanism, our Ethiopianism, is always that, like, the big bravado of commonality that will never waver. And I see that in a lot of my experiences as a kid, experiences in college and universities. I think Ethiopian patriotism is very dangerous as Ethiopian as American patriotism as well. Because I definitely think there is a bias against everybody else.
I think that's a good place for us to stop for today. we've covered quite a bit of terrain.
I do want to talk about one more topic, because we've been talking about education and the educational status, and we actually reverted back to the Derg regime, because one at some topics we were talking about how the educational level was so good back then, so much better, and then that utopia of education was quite large during the Derg regime. So my small question here for you guys is, do you think it would have been a different Ethiopia if the Red Terror did not happen, if a lot of educated men and women did not have to die during those times?
Oh, I have some thoughts about this. Go ahead, Sam. You start.
You have definitely more than Wahal here as well.
You know, what happened, that was almost like an intellectual genocide when you wipe out the academia, the intelligentsia of a society, because they may pose a threat to you, or they will pose a threat to you. Wiping out an entire, like, what that did was stunted, I feel like it stunted the development on a societal level of the next generation or two. When you get rid of, like, who's gonna teach the next generation critical thinking, or like, who's gonna teach the next like, you pretty much, you know, that caused much more damage 3-4 generations later, and no one really could, like, measure or get a metric on that impact. So yeah, but how would it incorporate, like, when you want to talk about feminism, when it came to this, like, I think we would have definitely seen a more progressive society now, if actions were more holistic or humanistic. There would have been a lot more, culture would still take prevalence over, especially, like, religious or any kind of, like, cultural things it still would stick, because people never want to move on from get rid of a culture. But there's just, there would have been we would have been in a better Ethiopia right now, the better state of Ethiopia, if there wasn't a,
So, a couple things. Any major historical event is going to affect the next one in ways that are impossible. Historians call this counterfactuals, right? If X had not happened as it did, what would have happened after that? But the two things you realize about counterfactuals, first of all, there is no answer to that. There's no way of knowing what would have happened next. There's a randomness about these things. And secondly, it is still helpful to ask those questions, but it's really helpful in terms of framing your analysis, or framing, like, as a question to frame our understanding of what took place, not to actually try to answer that question, because it really is impossible. I mean, if Haile Selassie hadn't been overthrown by the Derg, maybe he would have been overthrown by another coup that would have taken the country in a religious direction. Who knows? There's absolutely no way of knowing, right? However, I think we have to distinguish between the revolution and the Red Terror, right? Those are two different occurrences, right? The student movement early on, and then kind of what went wrong in the opposite direction. Furthermore, there are changes that took place, and I feel very strongly about this. There are changes that took place in the midst of all that terror that I am not afraid to say were positive, which is to say, it is not normal, and it amazes me that anyone would celebrate feudalism taking place in Ethiopia, that we would celebrate it in 2022, but also that we would celebrate it having gone on and wished for it to have continued. Forget about Haile Selassie specifically, but feudalism to have continued in Ethiopia, and all of the economic and political inequality that goes with those systems, to have continued beyond 1974. The fact that it exists, I mean, we're talking about a system that existed in Europe that they abandoned essentially in the 1500s and 1600s. in 1974, right? And that's also why the students were so radicalized, because they realized we live under this sort of old autocrat who's on his last legs in a political and economic system of incredible injustice. And a lot of the people who led the vanguard of that movement, the student movement, were people who benefited the most, but who were raised with guilt and in a sense of, this is just not right. Like why should there be this intense class society and everything that goes with it, including gender inequality? So there's that. But the idea that, of course, had specifically the Red Terror and specifically the targeting of the intelligentsia in the Red Terror not taken place, would Ethiopia be in a better place? I would assume so, of course. You get rid of your own intelligentsia and you make it such that people no longer respect, no longer desire going into that intelligentsia. It becomes a deterrent, a disincentive to go into that line of thinking. I think that's part of what feeds the education crisis that I referred to earlier. Yeah. Is that people are like, oh, you want to like learn social sciences and political science and sociology and all that. Why? So that you can end up in jail in case you come into conflict with the next government. Go learn something technical. Go be a doctor. Right? Go be a banker. Go make as much money doing import-export as possible. Right? That mentality still exists. And I think that's one of the other consequences, those negative consequences that are unspoken, that I'm pretty sure come from what the question you just asked. How different would the country have been in that situation? Should we wrap up?
Yeah, I think so. If we talk past this, we're going to go through
in a million other directions, and we
should maybe postpone this conversation to another time. But yeah, this was a very entertaining conversation. Thank you, Max, for
me as well, and
for having this evening.
Thank you both for coming in. Come back anytime. This has been Ras Temari Radio. Offensive.